Hello students, so today we are going to start with the topic of power sharing. This is political science chapter 1. So in this chapter in the last class we'll resume our tour of democracy that we started last year in class ninth. We noted last year that in democracy, all power does not rest with only any one organ of the government. An intelligent sharing of power among legislature, executive, and judiciary is very important to the design of the democracy. So we had discussed that three basic pillars of democracy were judiciary, executive, and legislature. In this and the next two chapters will carry the idea of power sharing forward. We start with the two stories from Belgium and Sri Lanka. Both these stories are about how democracies handle demands for power sharing. The stories yield some general conclusions about the need for power sharing in democracy. This allows us to discuss various forms of power sharing that will be taken up in the following two chapters. So today we'll discuss about two basic case studies or two basic practical incidents. That is, one is that of Belgium and Sri Lanka. Starting with Belgium and Sri Lanka. So moving forward, Belgium and Sri Lanka. So Belgium is a very small country in Europe and it shares its borders with France, Netherlands, Germany, and Luxembourg. If you look at the world map, you can see that Belgium basically shares boundary with these four countries. The ethnic composition of Belgium is very complex, and Brussels is the capital of Belgium. So, the ethnic composition of this small country is very complex. Of the country's total population, that is 59% lives in Flemish region and speaks Dutch language. Another 40% people live in Wallonia region and speak French. Remaining 1% of the Belgians speak German. In the capital city, Brussels, 80% people speak French while 20% are Dutch speaking. So the minority French speaking community was relatively rich and powerful. So it had the ethnic composition was very complex, as we discussed that around 59% lived in Flemish region, 40% lived in the Wallonia region, and then others, that is 1%, and the 59% who lived in Flemish regions spoke Dutch, and 40% of those people who lived in Wallonia spoke French, and others 1% spoke German. And Brussels, which is the capital of Belgium, had 80% people of French speaking and 20% of Dutch speaking. So the minority French speaking community was relatively rich and powerful. This was represented by the Dutch speaking community who got the benefit of economic development and education much later. This led to the tensions between the Dutch speaking and French speaking communities during the 1950s and 60s. So the tension between the two communities was more acute in Brussels. Brussels presented a special problem. The Dutch-speaking people constituted a majority in the country, but a minority in the capital. Let us compare this to the situation of another country, that is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is an island nation, and it is a few kilometers off the southern coast of Tamil Nadu. And Tamil natives of Sri Lanka are called Sri Lankan Tamils. Indian Tamils are those whose forefathers came from India as plantation workers during the colonial period. So Sri Lanka has a diverse population. The major social groups are the Sinhala speakers, that is 74%, and the Tamil speakers, that is 18%. And among the Tamils, there are two subgroups. Tamil natives of the country are called Sri Lankan Tamils, that is 13%. And the rest, whose forefathers came from India as plantation workers during the colonial period, are called Indian Tamils. As you can see from the map, that Sri Lankan Tamils are concentrated in the north and the east of the country. Most of the Sinhala speaking people are Buddhist, while most of the Tamils are Hindus and Muslims. So there are about 7% of Christians who are both Tamil and Sinhala. So we spoke about it, that their Sinhala speakers were around 74% and Tamil speakers were about 18%. Indian Tamils were those whose forefathers came from India as plantation workers during the colonial period, and there were around 7% Christians who are both Tamil and Sinhala. And most of the Sinhala speaking people are Buddhists, while most of the Tamils are Hindus and Muslims. So just imagine what would happen in a situation like this. In Belgium, the Dutch community could take advantage of its numeric majority and force its will on the French and German speaking population. This should push the conflict among communities further. So we discussed about the differences in the ethnic population in Belgium. So what could happen is that the Dutch community could take the advantage over its number and force out the French and the German speaking population, and this would create a huge conflict between the two different communities, and this could lead to a very messy partition of the whole country. Both the sides would claim control over Brussels. In Sri Lanka, the Sinhala community enjoyed an even bigger majority and could impose a will on the entire country. Now let us look what happened in both these countries. So in the next class, we'll start with individual discussion on Sri Lanka and on Belgium.